The Rambam writes, Deios harbe yesh kol echad ve'echad b'mnei odom. The many tendencies which people have, or predilections, the zu mishunim mizu, and each person is different than the other. And he'll explain in a moment. Miz urachoka mimeni yoser, and it can be extremely different. For instance, let's say you have two people, they enjoy eating, but one person could be a glutton. Another person, he enjoys eating, but he's not a glutton. Another person, it's not his thing. He's not into food. And not into food means he eats what he has to eat. Other person, even when he's supposed to eat, he has no interest in eating. He has to really force himself to eat. Just a different, it has to do with the predilection, with the chemistry of the person, and the way he processes life, he processes differently. Certain people are generous, very generous, extremely generous, giving. Other people are miserly to the point, as there's an expression in English, they won't give you ice in the winter, to that degree. That's how not giving they are. Certain people are self-centered to the point, all they see is themselves, they don't see beyond themselves. Everything in life only revolves around themselves. Other people have a level of humility that the only thing that matters is the other person. They themselves feel their worthiness is only helping another person. That's the level of humility. So these are extremes, and there's a lot in between. Everybody has an ego to a degree, but people within the realm of ego, the people are more humble, less humble. But ultimately humble, where a person has no interest that he should be stroked to any degree, that's something which is very rare. That person is usually an exceptional person. But these are inborn, here we have their inborn predilections, because we're going to see in a moment, a person, even if you're born with a certain tendency, through conditioning or through understanding, you're able to overcome certain things. I'll give you an example. Person is raised in a very material context by his parents. They provide for him because they don't know any better. And they teach him that quality of food is important. You must have nothing less than the best quality wine, nothing less than the best cut of meat, the best quality bread. And as he gets older, he realizes that's not what life's all about. It's not the quality of the food. It's not the wine. It's not the bread. This is all only a means to an end to be healthy. So if you eat something which is not as addicting or as costly versus as why go to the extra cost expense, you could live more modestly. So there, it was only because he was raised that way. And when you feed the monster, so to say, you increase that tendency. But if you actually temper it by withdrawing, then you lose interest. It's not, because you've come to another level of understanding. That's what life's all about. The famous story with the Nitziv, Rav Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, his father was a great scholar, and his father was a very wealthy man. And his father and mother were very special people. And when he was a child, his father wanted that he should be a great Talmid Chochem. He should grow into be even to a Torah age. And his father would underwrite him financially. His father would back him. And he'd be able to study Torah all his life. He was an unruly child. And as much as they hired tutors and encouragement and created an environment, they couldn't really rein in on him. And he was this child which they couldn't take control of him. So one night, his father and mother were having a conversation that they said, look, we've done our best. Our child's not grow up to be this great Talmid Chochem, and we have to teach him a trade. The Mishnah tells us that a parent has an obligation to provide a livelihood for his child, and therefore we have to teach him a trade. Otherwise, if a person doesn't have a trade, he'll resort to illegal means of support. So they discussed it, and it was late at night, and he said, we're going to apprentice him to be a shoemaker. We'll get the best teacher, and he'll mentor him to be a shoemaker, and that'll be his livelihood. He overheard the conversation. of his parents. And when he realized where he had gone to, although he was only at the time 12 years old, he realized that his parents were willing to write him off, so to say. He was like taken aback, shocked, and he came downstairs and he started to cry and he begged his parents to give him another chance. And he applied himself. And because he overheard that conversation, he ultimately developed into one of the leading Torah sages of his generation. And he was the Rosh Hashiva of Volozhin. Volozhin was the leading Torah institution in Europe, which produced the greatest Torah scholars. And he was the head of this. He published endless works, the most advanced works on the Talmud, on Chumash, and everything. Why? Because he overheard that conversation. So what was he? He was an unruly child. So when you raise a child and you recognize his strengths and his weaknesses, you have to be able to channel those strengths to be in an area which it could be constructive, not just wasteful. And that's what his parents did. And because he overheard the conversation, he took it seriously and he realized this is his last opportunity, he went for it. So we see, even though a person has certain predilections, you have certain tendencies. You want to do what you want to do. You want to be unsupervised. You want to be carefree. When you come to realization, carefree leads you to nothing, and you come to that realization, then you take the qualities and the abilities you have and you invest them in a constructive way. So even though we're born with many things, humble, a person is arrogant. And sometimes people, when they behave arrogantly, they pay the price. Nobody wants to have anything to do with them. Because people realize having to do with this person, all it means is accommodating that person, stroking their ego. That's all he's interested in. He wants to be your friend, but the friendship is for him, not for you. People stay away from when that person comes to that realization, maybe, if he could, he would start reining on himself and suppress his ego. There's a famous story in the Gemara, very interesting story. It was the time when the Jews started to Hellenize. And there was a king, his name was Janus. And Yanai was married to one of the greatest Torah sages, sisters of the generation, Shimon Shetach. And he Hellenized. And he became evil. He killed the Chachamim. He killed all the great Torah sages of the generation, except because his brother-in-law was the brother of his wife. His wife sent him into hiding. So her husband couldn't kill him. Okay? So there was a disagreement between Yanai and his wife regarding the meat of a sheep is better quality meat or the meat of a goat. That's the question. They had an argument. Which species is a better quality meat? The goat or the sheep? Okay? So Yanai says to his wife, you know something? Let's go speak to the high priest who's involved with sacrificing these different species in the temple, and we'll ask his opinion. He's the expert. He will tell us which is a better quality meat, the goat meat or venison, sheep meat, lamb, which is better. This, in those days, this Kohen Gadol, this high priest was a bad person. He was such a person who was so self-centered. Normally, when the Kohen sprinkles the blood of the sacrifice on the altar, he has to sprinkle it with his hand. He can't have anything. It has to touch his finger. This person was very particular. He wore a white glove. So he would dip his finger with the glove in the blood and sprinkle it on the mizbeach, on the altar. Okay? So they call this high priest, who wasn't such a good Jew, because his ego, rather than soiling his finger with the blood of the korban, he wore a glove. They come and they call him this. We want to ask him, you're the expert in species. Which species is a better species? The goat or the sheep? So when he responded, he made a hand motion to the king and queen. And he made a hand motion like this, of course the goat. And when he raised his hand and made that gesture, which was an expression of arrogance, it was lacking in respect because nobody raises his hand before the king. Janus gave a decree that he has to have his right hand cut off. Yeah. Measure for measure. If the blood of the korban is considered soil in your hand, your finger, you're not going to have a hand. So he made that gesture. So Hashem says, you know something? You're going to lose that arm. So it was decreed, he should lose the arm. So what happens? He was a wealthy man, the high priest, and he paid off the executioner. He should cut off his left arm because his right arm is more important than his left arm. Word got back to the king, Yanai, and he heard that the executioner who was supposed to cut off his right arm cut off his left hand arm. So he gave a decree, says now cut off his right arm. So at the end of the day, this high priest had neither arm. He didn't have the left, he didn't have the right. So this high priest, how arrogant could you be? No, you're evil. King, whatever it was, he killed all the rabbis because somehow they insulted him. They said something and he was insulted. He says, look at all these rabbis. They're against me. But this man, you're doing the service in the Beis Hamikdash and temple. This holy blood, this is sacrificial blood. This brings atonement. You don't want to soil your hands with that, with the what? With that blood. Hashem says, I'll teach you a lesson. But it was always based on arrogance. It's beneath my dignity that I should soil my hands. When it comes to doing the service of Hashem, it's never beneath your dignity. Never. So we're talking about predilections. There are nuances of differences between people. More humble, less humble. More arrogant, less arrogant. More self-centered, less self-centered. More giving, less giving. Then you have extreme. Miserly, extremely generous. Gluttonous, a person is an aesthetic. He has no interest. No interest in material, period, at all. Not even to the degree what he needs to eat. Even that he doesn't. He has to be reminded, or he has to force himself to eat. Just as an aside, the law is that if you drink water, as you eat anything or drink anything, you're supposed to say a bracha, a blessing. There's a pre-blessing before you eat or drink anything. That pre-blessing is rabbinical. Now, if you drink any liquid, juice, wine, or any flavored beverage, whether you're thirsty or not, you have to say a blessing. You have to say Shakol Niya B'Dvaro. That's the blessing. Shakol Niya B'Dvaro. But water, if you drink water, the Talmud tells us that's only if you have a desire to quench your thirst. But if you don't, that's not your interest. And you have no benefit, pleasure from it, that it's somehow quenching your thirst, one doesn't make a bracha on water. For instance, let's say a person is not thirsty to any degree, and he has to drink water to be hydrated, because otherwise he become dehydrated. And he drinks the water, and he's not thirsty to any degree. When he drinks that water, he does not say a bracha. But if you drink juice or Gatorade, which has a taste, you say a bracha. Why? Because when you drink something that has a taste, whether you're interested or not, your palate, your taste buds have pleasure from that. Water is very unique. If you're thirsty or you have some degree of thirst, then the water, you desire the water. You have benefit from the water. If not, you have to force yourself to drink that water. Person has to drink, you have to force yourself to drink so many liters a day, not to be dehydrated. Something you have to force the water down. But if you drink juice or anything else, because that has a taste, there's a natural interest in drinking it. Water only, that's when you say shakol. It's interesting. Rav Shach once said, we find that Torah is compared to water based on verses and prophets. So when you drink water, if you have no benefit, doesn't quench your thirst whatsoever, what is the value of the water? It doesn't have that innate value of water because you're not having pleasure from it, even at a minimal level. Torah is compared to water. When you study Torah, you're supposed to have some level of pleasure from it, benefit. You have to see its value. Let's say a person is like being force-fed Torah. He has no interest. No, it doesn't touch him even to any degree in a positive way. that Torah has very little value. Although you're saying the words, but it has very little value because the Torah goes and the prophet compares it to water. As water quenches the body, hydrates the body, Torah hydrates the soul. It's the basis for life. Same idea. But again, people are gluttonous, they'll eat anything. To the degree to speak about every person has a nuance of difference than the other person. Here's an example. You have a person who has an anger issue, and he's always seething, always about ready to explode over every little thing. You know, the Gemara tells us in one location that a person who gets upset over any little thing, and in addition, he's envious. He has two negative characteristics. Envy, and everything touches him, he's about to explode. He has an uncontrollable anger. This person's life is no life. That life is literally suffering. Why? Could you imagine, God forbid, a person is seething with anger. Wherever he turns, he's upset. That means all his waking hours, he's upset. And his waking hours, when he sees anybody has anything, he's envious of that person, regardless what he has. That means this person doesn't have peace of mind or peace of emotion, not for a moment. The Gemara says that person's life is not worth living. He's living a continuous hell. But a person who's satisfied, a person who's not upset, everything doesn't ruffle his feathers. He could be sedate. This person lives a life of tranquility. I mean, everybody has some degree of fuse. You could upset a person, but it's not everything upsets you. We'll see later, the Rambam writes, and this is very interesting, and this has to do with behavior. Repetitive negative behavior ultimately is unhealthy because ultimately it can become reflexive behavior if you repeat it long enough. Reflexively, this setting, you act and react a certain way. So Rambam says, the Talmud tells us that anger is one of the most negative characteristics that a person can possess, anger. Because when a person gets angry, you lose control of, you don't behave rationally. And there's no telling what a person can do in a state of anger. Today we see itself, people have road rage. Person that has road rage, God forbid they could kill a person. For what? Because he went in front of him. He cut him off, whatever it is. It's almost insanity. That's how negative anger could be. So Rambam says the times that you're permitted to get angry. If you see something which is unacceptable, unconscionable, you have a right to be angry and say something to that person, don't do it. And you're angry. But the Rambam says you should only get angry with something of great importance. And even that, don't do it too often. Why? Don't allow yourself to be exposed to that situation too often. Because if you do, ultimately, you're going to get angry for something of less importance. Because once you assume that characteristic, that conditioning of anger, you're not only going to become angry with things of great importance, even things of lesser importance. Because it takes over your life. That's what happens. You know, some people, because they're so busy, sometimes they skip lunch, they skip a meal, because they're so busy. Other people, because they have so much time to whittle away, and they sit around. The wife says to the husband, "You're in the refrigerator. I just heard the refrigerator open. The cupboard. What's going on?" Because since they haven't, so what? They have to whittle away their time. So they start eating. But if a person conditions himself that he eats even when he shouldn't be eating, this person is going to be eating when he should not be eating, even when he doesn't need the nourishment. Because already he assumed the habit. He's assumed it's a semi-addiction. Eating could be an addiction too. You say today they have this Ozempic. You know, people losing 40, 50, 60 pounds. The moment they get off that medication, you don't know what's going to happen. we're going to have like a population explosion. Before 1,200 calories was enough, now the man needs 6,000 calories to maintain that original state, which you only need originally 4,000. It's called expansion. Because again, because the nature of the beast is that you could suppress the beast, but the moment you remove that medication, it expands. There's a famous story. Rambam, Maimonides, was known as the world-renowned physician, and he was a doctor to the Sultan of Egypt, the king of Egypt, and he outpaced all the physicians of the Sultan. And being a Jew, and being a very observant Jew, and being a great Torah scholar, because of anti-Semitism, they wanted to disgrace Rambam. And they kept whispering in the Sultan's ear, although you think he's this, but all the Muslim physicians disagree with him, and he's flattering you. He's trying to hoodwink you. He's misleading you. He's not what you think he is. And they wanted to discredit Rambam, although he was the greatest physician in the world at the time. And probably the greatest physician since then, nobody's been as great as Rambam, even in medicine. So what happened? So they presented something to Rambam, and it was an agreement or disagreement. Could you take an animal and train him and condition him to behave like a human being through conditioning, to assume a second nature? Rambam says impossible. An animal cannot be trained. An animal innately is an animal. It always will have animalistic characteristics. As much as you condition him, that animal will be the animal. They all of them said, we disagree. We can train the animal. So he says, okay. So they said, we're going to have a showdown. We're going to take a bobcat, and we're going to train him to walk on his hind legs, to be able to wear a tuxedo, or whatever the Muslim dress was for a formal dinner. He'll be the maitre d' at a dinner for the Sultan, and he will come in and serve the Sultan whatever is being served, all the delicacies of the main course. And we could prove that we could do it, and the bobcat could assume a behavior pattern like a human being, and it will become like that through second conditioning. Rambam says impossible. They said, okay, do you agree that if we could disprove you, you'll back down and you'll resign your position as leading physician for the Sultan? He says, definitely. I'll resign my position. That proves that you have better understanding, because many illnesses have to do with the emotion and with the psychological makeup of a person. And if you understand better than I do, then I'm willing to resign. Okay? So they said, we need 6 months to train the bobcat. And they had all kinds of rehearsals, like people before weddings, they have rehearsals. They got the bobcat walking down with the father-in-law and the mother-in-law. They got it all done. They got the photographer there, and they want the wedding should match, the rehearsal. Okay. They want to get it perfect. So finally, the days come, they have the dinner. And what do you think happens? This bobcat comes out dressed in one of these Muslim formal dresses. He's the maitre d', comes out carrying a tray with on the Sultan's dishes, with the glasses, the most expensive glass, everything. And he's walking on his hind leg daintily, gently, with all the etiquettes of a maitre d', like he went to diplomatic schools to teach him how to behave like a diplomat, this bobcat. And Rambam was waiting for this. What he did was he brought a little box with mice in it. And as the bobcat got close to the Sultan, he takes the mice, throws them on the floor. The moment this bobcat sees the mice, it drops the tray, it reverts immediately back to the bobcat. It's a disaster. Rambam proved its point. An animal will always be an animal. You could condition it to behave temporarily a certain way, but circumstance, it reverts immediately back to what it is. That's the reality of an animal. A human being can be conditioned over an extended period of time where you could change the nature of a person in a very serious way. An animal cannot. It's all superficial. That's the point. We're all born with certain predilections. What do? We intensify them through repeated behavior. Person is raised a certain way. Very, very often you find parents who are overweight, they have overweight children. Why? Because that's the way they eat. That's the way they raise their children. So the children are conditioned to eat, and eventually they're out of control. They're not even aware of what they're consuming. So of course, when you go to a clothing store, they used to have chubby. The kid was taken to the chubby line rack of suits. Husky. It's called Husky. You had Huskies up in the North Pole, and you had Huskies here on, the Lower East Side. That's what you had, Huskies. But it's the same thing. Human beings, very often, we may have certain predilections, but we don't have to turn it into an addiction. So you could go in either direction. Heard a story yesterday, beautiful story. Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach passed away maybe 20 years ago. He was a colleague of Reb Elyoshiv. They were both leading the sizes in Israel, known as poskim, leading Torah sages in Israel. Reb Elyoshiv, when he passed away, he had at his funeral 400,000 people. That's how many people attended his funeral. Could you imagine? No? The president of the United States at his funeral doesn't have so many people. Maybe you have viewers on TV, but president at the funeral, you don't have 400. He had 400,000. Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach was a colleague of his for many years. They were both very holy men. He passed away, also had maybe 225,000 people, very large numbers. And he was a genius. They both were geniuses. They photographed memories, and they ruled on many things. Medical ethics, many things. And what's life, what not life is, when does life end? Is it brain activity, not brain activity? They ruled on all these things. So Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, being this great Torah sage, he came to a certain event, and there were 10,000 people there. And when he came, they started to sing, and they started to dance, and they had to sing his praises. And you'd see a person being honored to such a degree, it somehow touches your ego. You enjoy it. You've made it. Whoever heard us, 10,000 people. The moment you walk in, it's like you just ignite them, and they're giving you all this honor. So he comes home, and his wife says to him, "So what happened?" He says, "I want to tell you what happened. But you know something? All that," he says, "yesterday I had a call from Moshe Feinstein, Zecher Tzaddik Livrocha, of blessed memory, who was the leading Torah sage in the world, the sizer, and he wanted to consult with me on a certain halachic issue. To me, that had greater value than the 10,000 people dancing and singing around me. That's what honor is. If he wants to pick my brain to get my opinion, what I think within a halachic context, the greatest Torah sage in the world, that gives me credibility. That's value. That's accomplishment. That the whole world dances around you and sings around you means nothing. As they take it or leave it. What are you going to do with it? What does it prove? What does it say? That says nothing. At this, you can't put it in the bank. But if you have credibility that the greatest Torah decider of the world is consulting you because he wants to get your take on it, your opinion, that's what it's all about. See, it's one thing you see for sure. People live for acknowledgement. They will kill for acknowledgement. They'll spend endless amounts of money to be in those neon lights. They used to call them neon lights. Today they call LEDs. One time they called neon lights. That's what it was. These people never had an interest in this at all. All that matters to do the right thing. And what is the right thing? What God wants you to do. That's all that mattered. So if you understand that, anything else, you're wasting your time. Could you imagine you have an employer, he gives you a line of credit to use for the business. And you go use it, and you buy licorice, and you feed the poor licorice all day long. And then your employer, who's your benefactor, who gave you all this money, just to tell me what was the return. Says, I fed all these poor people. They had a choice of licorice, either red, brown, or black. He said, I think I agree. He said, no, something, you're fired. What, are you out of your mind? That's what I gave you the line of credit for. I gave it to you to be productive. God gives us a life. He gives us a soul. What's the value of our lives? To invest it in nonsense, in your ego. But you realize I have a bathroom. It costs $3 million. I got the best designer and decorator. When the water flushes, it flushes at a force that it's the equivalent of a typhoon. You understand? But that's not what life's all about. You're lucky you weren't sucked down when you pulled the lever. But people don't get it. I belong to that country club, that golf club. $1 million membership. There's such a golf club a country club in Long Island. It's status and prestige. Is that what life's all about? Well, I could afford it. And if I can afford it, I'm going to tell people who I am, because I rub shoulders with these kinds of people. When there's no car less than a Bentley or Rolls Royce or some other foreign exotic type car, where if you're more than 15 years old, you can't even get that low on the ground. That's how low it's on the ground. I'm being facetious, but that's a reality the way people invest their lives. Rambam writes in the Laws of Tshuva, he says that those who say, which they're a bunch of fools, they don't understand that a person's profile is already set from the moment he's born. A person who's meant to be a thief, a murderer, that's his what? That's his profile. That's his character. And he can't change it. And a person who's devout, it's because he was born with a devout inclination. So really, he has no choice. The person who's devout, there's no choice but to be devout. The person who's evil, whether he's a thief or whatever he may be, he really has no control. Rambam says, anybody who says that is a fool. They don't begin to understand what they're speaking about. Every person is born at a point, like at a crossroads. You have the ability to override that inclination to go in either direction. You may be inclined to evil, but you can rein in on yourself and you can be devout. And the person who naturally has an inclination to be devout, if he chooses to be evil, he can override and be evil. That's the reality. Because it's understood. Because Rambam is coming from not only as a doctor and as a psychiatrist and a psychologist and knowing everything, he's coming from the Torah. If the objective of creation, of existence, is one punishment, which is based on because you deserve, because you chose to do the right thing, and you're culpable because you chose to do the wrong thing, but if you had no choice but to go in that direction, why is there any liability or culpability? Automatically, that confirms that you have the ability to overcome it. You could rein it against the negative, and you could actually be motivated to do the positive. That's the Rambam. But what does the world say? He's going from people who are the experts. Somebody has a criminal profile. There is such a thing as a person's unstable. Person's unstable, he has no liability. A person's unstable, he has no control over himself. You can have 190 IQ. If you're unstable, you have no liability. Because liability is only when you have control over yourself. But if you can't control yourself, because the person's unstable, there's no culpability, there's no liability to that person. There's a discussion in halacha. A person who naturally, let's say he's bipolar, if he doesn't take his medication, he has no control. But if he takes his medication, then he's in control. See, it's interesting. You have a person, if he behaves a certain way when he's not taking his medication, he has no liability. But when he's taking his medication, since at that time he's balanced, whatever he does wrong, He's held accountable for that because he had control that he could have restrained himself not to do that wrong. So there's a question now. The law is if a man wants to divorce his wife, he has to be competent. He has to be competent. What happens if he's not taking his medication? He's not qualified to divorce his wife because in that state, he's not competent. What about he's a person where he took his medication today, and that's why he has an understanding of what he's doing, because he could give or not give the divorce. Everybody agrees. If he's taking his medication today, although yesterday, if he would have given yesterday when he wasn't taking medication, although he had a certain lull at that time, it's not valid. Because at any moment, that person could go out of control. When you have medication and you balance every moment because you've taken that medication, therefore you're always in a position to make a choice, and you have control to make a choice as you choose to make that choice. Very important principle over here. Why we're all held accountable. Why? For that reason. Whatever we do, why aren't you more devout? Why aren't you more righteous? Because I think I'm enough. I don't have to do more. I'm satisfied. Okay. You agree you can do more, but you chose not to because you don't want to be. So everything's choice. A person, doctor says, if you don't lose weight, God forbid, you could suffer a heart attack. Person comes back, he hasn't lost weight. Why? But your life's at stake. Because this person, for whatever reason, he somehow goes into a state of denial, and when he craves for that food, he doesn't think about dying. It's okay. And there's a continuous justification of crossing the line. But ultimately, where is he? He's in a state where, God forbid, he could have a heart attack because he hasn't taken off the weight or hasn't lowered his blood sugar, whatever his condition is. Same idea. He has control. We all choose to somehow check out. We go into a blind spot. And when you're in the blind spot, like sometimes you have on the mirror, blind spot, whatever it is, before they had the light going on when a car passed you, there's a blind spot. And you have to take into account that blind spot. If not, God forbid, you could be in an accident. We're all born with blind spots. And we know that. Knowing that, you have to take that into consideration. And that's part of your extent of your choice.